Hey, welcome, everybody. It's another episode of your favorite weekly podcast. It's Monday, of course, because it's always Monday on this show. And it's your good buddy Spider talking at you, doing the thing, getting ready to get into it. So what are we talking about tonight? What is the deal? What do we have? We're going to be digging deep once more into my childhood and into my adult life now. We're going to be talking about action figures. Are they dolls? Are they not dolls? What makes a doll, and an action figure? Let's find out. Let's talk about this. And that, of course, is the name of the show. Let's talk about this. Much better than any other version of the Let's Talk About genre out there, I suppose. And, so action figures. Action figures were always a big part of my childhood. And arguably, they're also a big part of my adulthood, as you would ask the other people in my family. And, what is an action figure? It is a moving toy that basically depicts a cartoon character or a game character or a movie character. You can generally equip them with weapons or just equipment or outfits or whatnot. And the big thing is that they move. They have moving arms and legs most of the time. That's what makes them an action figure. Sometimes they have really good joints and things on them. For elbows and knees and fingers and things like that. That's more of a modern thing than the old days. But, those are basically action figures. Now, you may ask, because this has been like a gender thing over the many, many years. You may ask, what is an action figure as opposed to a doll? And it's kind of a complicated question, believe it or not. Because there are dolls that are action figures at the same time. So Barbie dolls, for instance, I would argue, are actually an action figure. While still being a doll, if you want to call it that, because they have moving arms and legs, they have moving neck joints, they have accessories. It might not be bazookas and things like that, but, she's got her outfits and her purses and her shoes and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes if you get, like, one of those job Barbie dolls that has the like, a doctor Barbie, she's got a doctor's kit, or I don't know what all kind of Barbies there are. My sisters had Barbie dolls, and my daughter has some. She's got princesses from Disney, and they come with all kinds of stuff. They come with outfits and combs and animal sidekicks and stuff. But they're action figures, basically. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, action figures are for boys and dolls are for girls. But this is 2023. We should be well beyond this by now, everybody. Okay? You can play with whatever you want. You can play with a Barbie, you can play with a Transformer, you can play with a My Little Pony, you can play with whatever. It's no big deal. You can play with a Hot Wheels car, a Matchbox car, Legos. You don't have to be boy, girl, or otherwise. You don't have to be any specified gender to play with any of them. You could be non-binary if you want, whatever that means. I'm honestly, I'm not making a joke at that because I don't know. I'm not part of that thing, and I don't mean to say a thing as in a derogatory term. I know what I am, I know what other people are, and I don't worry about the specifics. It's not up to me. Okay, however you portray yourself is however you portray yourself. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks about it, because I don't care about it. I'm not going to worry about it, so don't worry about it. But yeah, it's... And if you want to say something is a doll, a true doll is generally not something that is meant to be in action poses and do action things when you play with them. They're more supposed to be cuddled. They're like a soft toy, or I know there's dolls that are with moving arms and legs that are baby dolls and things like that. And I still think those could technically be an action figure if they've got joints and stuff. But, it's tough to define. But that's what I think. And that's what I'm going to stick by. But action figures. I'm going to stick mostly to the action figures that I was familiar with as a kid and that I am familiar with as an adult. I don't own any Barbies. My daughter does, as I just said. But I don't own any, so I don't have any real experience personally, other than, they get left all over the house in frequent modes of undress. Scandalous. Scandalous. Anyway, action figures. And when I was growing up, action figures were generally always tied to some other form of media. They were usually tied to a TV show or a movie or a video game once video games became more common and weren't just like Pong and Atari and stuff. When video games were on the early Nintendo systems and then onwards to PlayStation and Xbox, you had action figures from that kind of stuff. And you have action figures that are based on anime, although you also have a lot of just you have a lot of display figures from anime that don't move. They're just supposed to stand there and to look cool, I guess. And so those aren't really action figures because they don't do anything. They just stand there. They're figurines, I guess is what you'd say. Figurines. But, yeah, most of the action figures I had as a kid all had a cartoon or something that I could directly tie them to. G.I. Joe, I had some G.I. Joes, and I didn't really watch the cartoon too much. I did a little bit, but not too much. It wasn't my thing as much as other things. And I had a couple of comics from G.I. Joe. But the action figures, and they're still making G.I. Joe today. Hasbro owns G.I. Joe, as they own many action figure lines, as you're going to find out. Hasbro owns G.I. Joe. And so they still make modern interpretations. You can get classic versions that have like the little rubber band in the hips to hold their legs on. As a kid, they would always snap because I was always trying to get them to do the flips and the tumbles and the splits and stuff. And then eventually that rubber band would snap and their legs would fall out. And there was no good way to fix it. I mean, theoretically you could if you knew somebody who could get in there and with a new rubber band, but I couldn't. So they were legless. But, yeah, and G.I. Joe always came with, like, all kinds of things. You had vehicles, big play sets. And when I was a kid with those at the time, we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. So when I'd get G.I. Joes, most of my G.I. Joes were secondhand. We had a church at the end of the street where my folks live. It's still there. The church is still there. And people still, it's still in active use. But the church there has a bit of property on the corner across the road that's a log cabin and a little playground and stuff. But what they would do every year is they would have this sale. It's like a big yard sale or flea market kind of thing where people connected to the church would just bring in their stuff and sell it. And it would benefit it would generally benefit the church. I don't know if any of the people got individual. I think everything was supposed to be donated. Like, you'd come up and you'd assume that it was donated. And all the money went to the church so the church could do improvements and things like that. This isn't like a mega church. It's not like Joel Osteen kind of stuff. It's just a little country church. So most of the money went to improvements and things for kids. Okay. But, so I would get... My folks would take us up there as kids because we could just walk down there. It was just within walking distance of the house. We'd walk down there and we'd buy toys and all kinds of stuff. Like, I got huge used G.I. Joe playsets and things like that down there. I got some Transformers, which I'll talk about later. But, yeah, I got big playsets. And they're still there at my folks' house, I believe. They're in the closet of my old room. And the house is in pretty bad shape, so that stuff is probably not in the best shape either. So a lot of it I did give away. A lot of it I did give away to relatives, like younger cousins who were growing up, who needed toys. But there's still some of it there, some vehicles, and probably some figures. I don't know. Some of it I brought here with me just, I don't know, out of nostalgia or just because it just happened to come along in the moves that I made when I left home. But, so I had some G.I. Joe playsets. One was like a big jail cell complex. I had a Jurassic Park playset. I had a Jurassic Park playset that was like the big visitor center that you could open up with like dinosaur damage. They could come through the wall. I had a couple of dinosaurs and like an Alan Grant and a Dennis Nedry, and none of them looked like they did in the movie. They were all muscular and tough looking, and they have these big like water cannon and claw weapons and stuff. I'm like, none of this was in Jurassic Park, but I didn't care. I was a kid. And that's sometimes what happens. You'll get like, they had Terminator toys and Alien toys and Predator toys when I was a kid, but they had so much stuff that wasn't in any of the media. It wasn't in any of the movies. They had all these different kinds of Predators and all these different kinds of aliens and these different Terminators with big claw arms and stuff. And they were cool. I mean, as a kid, you don't care. As a kid, you're just like, look at all this stuff my toy can do. It's got this claw. It's got this. It squirts water. Look at all this stuff. And you were excited about it. Now it's kind of like they look kind of silly. But, because like as a purist, you can be like, oh, that was never in the movie. They made that up for the toy. But who cares? It's an action figure. It's a fun kid's toy. And there were a few other things, like, especially when I was growing up in the 80s. In the 80s, there were so many cartoons that didn't last for very long, but they had toys of them. Because when, at the time, especially for people like Hasbro, they're a toy company. Okay, they're a toy company first, and so they would make the toys, and the cartoons were supposed to sell the toys. They weren't supposed to tell cohesive stories and be the best storytelling you're ever going to find. They were there for the toys. So they didn't last very long. If the toys didn't sell very well, they canceled the cartoon. One of those was called Visionaries. I don't know if anybody remembers those, Visionaries. And I'm not going to go through the plot, but the action figures, they had these staves with these big picture frames on them that had a hologram in them, because holograms were a big new thing in the 80s for kids' toys. And the holograms, they move as you went back and forth. And in the cartoon, they would have these staves, and they would call these animals and beasts and things out of these staves, and they'd pop out, and that's what the holograms were supposed to be. And I had a few of those, and they were cool. I guess they were too expensive to keep producing, which is why they canceled the toy line and they canceled the show, I guess. And then there were Dino Riders. Dino Riders was cool. I don't think I had any Dino Riders toys, but I do remember the show. It was like two different species. One was like a humanoid species, and another was all like sentient lizards and things like that. And they landed on this planet, crash landed on this planet, and their ships were destroyed. But they encountered, it was a prehistoric planet with dinosaurs. Like they went back in time or something, which was something that got used in Transformers later on. But anyway, so they found these dinosaurs, and they could mentally communicate with them in cool ways. And the good guys were like, oh yeah, these dinosaurs are going to help us. They're going to help us build things and make this planet a better place for everybody. And the bad guys were like, we're going to take these dinosaurs and we're going to attack everyone and conquer everything. And they would outfit them with guns and armor and missiles and stuff. And they were so cool. And I didn't have any, but I liked them. I knew some people who had them, and they were so awesome. Like, the dinosaurs were motorized a lot of the time, so they would walk. So that was cool. I had Star Wars action figures throughout different parts of my childhood. Some of them are cooler than others. I have a few originals still. I have a couple of originals from the oldest releases. And I don't know if they're collector's items now. They're not in boxes. They're scuffed up. They're played with. But I don't care. They're cool. And I have some from the later series when the trilogy got re-released as the special edition on VHS before DVD came along. That's showing some age here for you folks. I have a couple from the prequels, but not many. I've only got one. Well, you know what? I've got one figure from beyond that, from beyond the prequels, which I have, that I got recently. I got it in the last year or so. I got a Dark Trooper, which were featured on, I guess, The Mandalorian. But I remember them from a game called Dark Forces when I was a kid, which was a first-person shooter. So as much as I don't watch The Mandalorian, I still had to get this figure because it reminded me so much of my childhood. It looks close. The one from the show is not exactly the same, but it looks close. It's a robotic, cybernetic trooper. And then I also picked up a throwback set. I picked up the Cantina Band within the last year or so because they're cool. Like, I loved Star Wars stuff when I was a kid. I don't so much anymore. It's unfortunate because I don't like the way that the franchise has gone, and that's a whole other topic. Maybe I'll do Star Wars as its own topic in the near future. But as far as toys go, I was like, I'm nostalgic. I gotta have the Cantina Band because they were always my favorite. I can play the Cantina Band, or I used to. I could be able to play it on my my marching band instrument. And yeah, so I got a whole set of them with their instruments and things. I don't have them on display yet. They're still in the box because I don't have a good place for them. Because most of my setup around here revolves around what you folks already know. My Transforming Robots collection, which is Transformers. As a kid, I loved Transformers. I remember one of my earliest memories of going to the movies, because people took their kids to the movies at younger ages than they do nowadays. I remember seeing the 86 movie. I was 3 years old, and I saw it in theaters. And you might think, why would they take a 3-year-old to the movie theater? Isn't that a scary experience? I don't know. I just remember seeing it. I also saw the 89 Tim Burton Batman in theaters, and that would be when I was 6. Because I remember it being dark and the big logo and the music and everything. Whew. That's not really a movie that you take a kid that young in retrospect, but the ratings and things were a bit looser back in the 80s, so you know. But yeah, Transformers. When I was a kid, I always wanted far more Transformers than I got, because again, we didn't have a whole lot of money. So I had an Optimus Prime. I had with the trailer and everything. I had an Ultra Magnus. I had a Double Dealer. And if you don't know what any of these characters' names are, you can look them up or you can just ignore me because I'm just going on my rant here. But my Double Dealer was one of my favorites. I loved it, even though it didn't have very good articulation. And that back then, they didn't really move around very much. The Optimus Prime was like the height of articulation because he could technically bend his knees and his elbows and his shoulders and things like that. And most of them could barely do that. Like Starscream, he could basically just move his arms. He couldn't walk. You couldn't move his legs back and forth because of the transformation. Like, the transformation was the important bit. It was the gimmick. And they wanted to make sure that they transformed before they were able to actually do anything else. And so a lot of your articulation was sacrificed in the name of being able to transform. Because that's what they are, the Transformers, right? But, so I had a few. I had a few with, like, the combiner limbs, but not the full thing, so I couldn't build a full combiner. I always wanted to, but I couldn't. So I had a few of them. And I still got some here, actually. I saved some of my Transformers, not many, because, and I've talked about it before, I think, we had a house fire in the early 90s, and I lost almost every one of my toys. I lost, for sure, my Double Dealer, and a couple other things. I've got the Optimus Prime. I've got a couple of the other ones, but not very many of them. And a lot of them are in sorry shape. And I'd gotten one of them from that church sale. When I'd gotten that whole G.I. Joe base, I got a Transformer. Still have him. And gosh, now the difference in the robots is night and day. Like, you can bend them all kinds of shapes and things. They can get into battle poses. They got so many accessories and things like that. And it's, for somebody like me who didn't have the money to really get into the hobby as a kid, getting into it now is amazing. And I've got far too many. I spend far too much money on transforming robots. I'll admit, I have a bit of a problem with it. And they're everywhere in the house. And I gotta have a better organization systems instead of just having them sitting on every available surface. But I'm glad they're around, because now I can also introduce them to my daughter, who has her own collection. She got really into the Beast Wars ones. The Beast Wars were her favorite because she likes animals, and so she's got a lot of those, and most of the animal themed ones like Dinobots and things like that. And she likes female Transformers because there were never a whole lot of those when I was a kid, and now that there are, she likes them because it's representation. She likes having female robots, and you may wonder, well, how can a robot have a gender? Well, if they choose to. That's basically it. There's different reasons given in the media, but the final thing is that basically they can choose to at some point, I think. And so that's good. I like having the options, and I know that she appreciates having the options. And she has a couple other action figures of her own too. She's got Batman, she's got Lex Luthor, she's got a Superman. And she has a G.I. Joe Baroness, a modern Baroness that doesn't have like the rubber band thing. She's like a full-sized figure because I got sent one by mistake in place of my Star Wars Dark Trooper. And they eventually made that right, but they had to... I was like, what do I do with this Baroness? I didn't order this because I don't do G.I. Joe. And they're like, well, you can keep it if you want. And I was like, okay. So I gave it to my daughter because she likes female characters and things, and so there she goes. She's got a female bad guy. And but yeah, Transformers I'm big on. I like Transformers. I follow them pretty close. I've seen all the modern shows. A lot of them within the 2000s were really awful. A lot of the early 2000s ones were really awful, and people will tell me, oh no, they're not that bad, but man, they were bad. Bad voices, bad storylines, just overall bad. But some of the figures were good. And we're still kind of struggling with modern Transformers shows. I watched Transformers Prime, which was one of the most modern ones, and it was okay. I mean, the storylines were alright. It was a bit dark for being targeted to kids, but it wasn't bad. The figures were, I don't know, I didn't like the designs of the characters. And the issue there, too, is that they're tied into the games, the War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron games, which I do like the aesthetic for those figures. So they go from them to the Prime figures, and I can't make that jump so much. And then I watched the new Netflix series, Newest, and it was decent. I don't have too many of the Michael Bay ones. I wasn't into the character designs. I liked the first movie for what it was because it was like nostalgia from being a kid. I didn't like most of the other ones after that. I did like the Bumblebee movie, and I do have a pretty hefty crew of Bumblebee movie figures because at the beginning of that they show a callback to like Cybertron, and they look like classic characters from the old cartoon. And that really was just like, okay, I'll go for that. I don't have much from Rise of the Beasts. I have a few of the Beast ones that aren't mine. They're for my daughter. And I have one figure from that is not all that great, to be honest, once I got it in hand. But I'm not into the Beast figures quite so much. I have a few. But mostly so that between me and my daughter, we can have a collection of them so that we can do Beast Wars battles. Because since she's really into it, I'm like, oh, well, I'll get a few too. And we can have our Beast battles because I want to include her in that kind of stuff. If she likes it, I want to like it with her too. So, but I'm not as into that. Like I don't have most of the Rise of the Beast stuff, but I do like a lot of the classic aesthetic, and I like reinterpretations of the classic aesthetic. And I like the comic ones that they've been releasing too. They've gone back to some of the IDW comics and picked out some characters that are kind of obscure and made modern figures for them that may have never had figures before, and that's cool. I like that. Now to talk about things that I don't have for a few minutes, but that are interesting, is that they still make figures based off of all these franchises. Like you can get God of War figures for the PlayStation game. You can get Halo figures. You can get Halo Legos and things like that. You can get Gears of War figures. You can get all kinds of things that if there's a franchise that has action heroes in it, they will make figures of it. And there's all kinds of them out there, and I don't even have some of those because I didn't get into some of that. But I think it's cool that they're there because it gives you the option. And sometimes you get into stuff that's not really action figures, but that's pretty advanced toys. They're basically model kits, like the Gundam stuff, which is similar to the Transformer stuff, but you actually get like a kit and you build it piece by piece, and then you can kind of pose it in different things. It's not necessarily an action figure, but it kind of is. And I actually, me and my daughter, we actually made a Transformer figure, like pieced him together piece by piece, because he was released in as a model kit. Basically, it was a Shockwave figure. It was a third-party figure, not from Hasbro, but from a third-party company called Warbitron, and he's supposed to go with a big, massive Combaticons Bruticus set, which I have, and so I had to get this Shockwave as an add-on. But the Bruticus set is all pre-built, of course, as most figures are, but the Shockwave is not. You get him in pieces on a sprue, which is those little frames that like model ships and model planes and things come on. I don't know how many people still get into that anymore. It's kind of a lost art, I guess. But yeah, they have a Shockwave that was like an add-on to that Bruticus set, and so we built him. We looked at the instructions. We built him bit by bit, got the screws in and everything like that, and he fully transforms and everything. And so we built our own Transformer. It was a good accomplishment, and I'm glad I was able to experience that with my daughter. I had some model kits as a kid, but I never got around to actually building them. I wanted to build... I had a boat. It was like a big schooner-style boat. I don't know, like with rigging and everything that I'd gotten for a gift somewhere. And I think me and my dad always meant to do something with it, but he never got the time. And that's not saying something bad about him. I'm not like going to turn this into a more never charm. No, he was a busy guy. He still is a busy guy, and I understand that. And I think I tried to do it myself, and I just couldn't get the hang of it because you need glue and you need some other things, and I didn't have some of that at the time when I was trying to do it as a kid. So I think I lost some of it, and then it's disappeared over the years. I have no idea what happened to it. I don't know. But most of the time, I didn't really do the model kit building stuff. But you can do that these days, and have some cool figures. And they do have Transformers figures that are just action figures that don't transform, and they're highly super detailed, super posable, and super expensive, but they don't transform. And to me, that's the whole point to having a transforming robot toy. It's so that it will transform. That's the gimmick. You gotta have them do that. Even if you only transform them a couple times and then you say, you know what, I don't like the vehicle mode as much, I like the robot mode. Or I don't like the robot mode, I like the vehicle mode. And you keep them in like that most of the time. The fact that it can do that is the whole point. So I don't spend money on Transformers that don't transform. Generally. There is a big niche for that, though. Like, there are people who are all out for that kind of stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep making them if there wasn't. But there's money there, so they make them. And that's fine. If that's what you like to do, that's what you like to do. I like to play with my action figures. I like to bend them around. I like to put them in action poses. I like to battle each other and things like that. And, you know, not as much as I used to. Like, right now, a lot of them end up just being on display. But I don't keep them behind glass. I don't, they get a little dusty here and there, so I have to periodically go through and blow the dust off and make sure the joints are still good. But, and I don't do mint in the box either. Like, some people, they'll get these action figures and they'll keep them in the box and put them up on the wall, or then put them even further behind a glass and things like that. And sometimes they do that to preserve the value so that they can resell them farther down the road. And other times they're just like, nah, I just want to keep them like that. And I'm like, why would you do that? Yeah, you're an adult. Maybe you don't play with toys anymore, but why buy a toy that you're not going to play with at least once? You know, that's what they're there for. They're toys. They're not there just to be looked at. Buy a figurine. Buy a statue if you don't want to play with it. Buy a statue. Don't buy an action figure. Action figures are there to be played with. And if you buy them just to keep them in the box, sealed completely, never to go out of your house in a climate-controlled area, not even to be sold necessarily unless it's some dire emergency, then you're depriving some kid who could get joy from that. Some kid who could really enjoy themselves and get use out of that toy. And I'm not going to go on some Toy Story kind of rant and how the toys would appreciate it. But it's just, that's what they're made for. They're made to be played with. Right? They're made to be played with. And I don't sit around all day playing with my action figures. I'd love to. But I don't got time for that. I don't got that kind of time in a day. But I like to sit down and pick one up and transform them sometimes. Move them around, have them point a blaster at each other, challenge each other to a fight, I like that. That's fun to me. So that's action figures. You don't have to be a boy, a girl, a specific gender or non-gender or whatever. You don't have to be anyone specific to enjoy them. If you like them, you like them. Get some. Play with them. Get some robots. Transform them. Do some stuff with them. It's cool. I ain't gonna judge you. Anybody who does judge you is got problems. There's no reason. Let people like things. Let people enjoy the things that they do. They like these stuff. I love these action figures. I got far too many of these Transformers all on display in various poses in my house. But that's what I like. And that's what I'm going to do. So that's what I'm doing. I hope you folks had a good time tonight. Questions, comments, concerns, you can send me an email at uncannyspiritsclub@gmail.com. Or you can drop a comment on this. It's going to be on YouTube and on Spotify. Spotify I don't think you can comment on. But if you want to listen to this on YouTube, you can drop a comment there. I would love to hear your thoughts. What kind of action figures did you have as a kid? Were you allowed to have them? Were your parents super strict about it? Or were they just like, hey, you know what, whatever, you like this, you can have it? Did they talk in that accent? Because I'd kind of want to meet them if they did. Yeah, some feedback. Let me know. Let me know what you think. And I will catch you folks next time for another episode of Let's Talk About This. So let's talk about that when we get there. Good night.